Hello everyone. I am a second generation Southeast Asian living in the US for personal reasons. I won't reveal exactly which nationality, so please don't bother asking. Also, this may be long, so please be prepared. To those of you unknowing, Southeast Asians as a whole are an extremely superstitious people. It doesn't matter whether it's the Vietnamese, the Thai, or the Cambodians, etc. All of them share very strong beliefs of it. This is all due to the region's religious belief that objects, places, and creatures all harbor a spiritual essence. This is known as animism. More info can be found on the religion in Wikipedia. As for me, I was not raised as my parents were. Since I was born in the US, I did not have to live as they did in the jungles, with no electricity and no running water. I did not have to hunt for my food, nor farm the lands to grow rice and vegetables. I was raised, as most of you were, surrounded by modern technology and a readily available education. Still, this does not mean that I did not experience aspects of my parents' and my people's upbringings. In a sense, I was raised in two worlds and exposed to two different beliefs. But because I did not live in the old world, as the elders in my culture refer to it, one world dominated the other overwhelmingly. I'm sure it's easy to identify which one won over the other. In any case, as a child of the modern world, and now an adult who has done very well to the point of having experienced a very, very, very great number of things, I began to grow bored, and boredom always spurs stimulation, at least for me. So I began my search for the next prospect, and I found that the only thing that got my heart racing was the supernatural. Though, to be honest, it has now migrated to cryptozoology, whether which the closely related subjects have both become my main interest, and that is when my journey to collect supernatural stories from Southeast Asia began. I hope you will enjoy them. As most of you are like me, there is a relatively good chance that very few of us have ever experienced living in the bushes. Very few of us have had to traverse through tall grass with only the moonlight to illuminate our paths. Very few of us have ever had to wake up in the middle of the night to go to the perimeter of our property in pitch blackness to relieve ourselves. And very few of us have ever had to undertake a several days hunting expedition with rusty weapons miles away from our homes and families to bring back meat. With that said, I inquired the elders of my culture and asked them if they had any horror stories or otherwise of the old country to tell, and this opened a very lively and enthusiastic dialogue. On the topic of hunting, all the elders agreed that one did not simply enter the jungles. You had to announce yourself and your intentions. The jungle is a sacred place, with many spirits roaming about. The jungle itself has a spirit, and entering its realm and taking from its bounty without first paying it respect is an offense that ensures a punishment. Mischievous children who wandered in despite being warned were often prey to this violation, along with those desperate for food and wandering in without due recognition. When I asked for specification of proper respect, I was given an assortment of answers. It depends, one elder said. You had to give alms equivalent to the deed you wanted to perform. Furthermore, you had to ask for safe passage. There are malicious spirits that reside inside, and many lives have been claimed by these entities. And so you had to make sure you offered enough. When asked what was considered enough, an elder responded,
We never knew. In fact, most villages were poor, and so we offered whatever we had. Oftentimes, we sacrificed a lone chicken and chanted prayers, hoping it was enough. When we returned, and some of us were missing, that meant we failed to satisfy the forest, and it had claimed some of us.
When I asked how often people went missing, one elder answered,
Asking for permission to enter is not enough. Bringing weapons for protection is not enough. You have to do everything in your power to make sure you come back alive. So we ask a shaman to bless us, and we carry with us charms to ward bad spirits away. And even still, on nights we had to sleep in the jungle, sometimes we woke up and one of us was gone. We knew the forest had taken that person. We would look and look and look, but find nothing. No trace, no footsteps, no blood. We did not even hear screaming. That person was just gone.
Then another elder chimed in.
My father would bring rope to tie to one another when they slept. That way, if one of them was dragged away, it would wake up the rest of them. But sometimes, even that did not work. He told me he lost a friend, even though they tied a rope to themselves and slept close to each other. He woke up, and his friend was just gone.
After a while, I asked about the rules of the forest. Many of the elders shook their heads.
There are so many. Even my grandfather did not know them all. But one thing he told me you must never do is take more than you need. If you go hunting, you kill only enough. If you kill a deer or monkey, you don't take the whole thing back. You always leave a limb or something.
When I asked why, the elder explained.
Taking the whole thing means you're greedy. The forest doesn't like that. They think you only want to take and take and take. You will make it angry.
Then another elder spoke.
Of course you cannot go hunt in the forest for several days without eating. But when you do, and you make a fire, it has to be small.
When I asked him why, he said,
Light attracts bad spirits. Some have never seen fire, so they become curious. But some know about it, and know that it hurts, so it makes them angry. So when we cook, we always cook before it gets dark.
But his answer prompted me to ask about how they stayed warm on cold nights.
Sometimes we had no choice. It was so cold, we had to make a fire, but we made it small, and always there was one of us that stayed awake. I've been lucky, and no one was ever taken from my group. Very, very lucky,
He said. As the subject of fire went on, the conversation then took a different turn. The elders began talking about spirits and creatures that they had seen. It was quite exciting. Before I stop, I just want to quickly state my position. For the most part, I remain a skeptic. However, I am open to the idea of the supernatural and creatures of lore and legend. I personally have never experienced anything myself, and many of the stories shared by the elders I found to have some sort of reasonable explanation to. I apologize if this was not particularly scary, and rereading it now, it's more on the interesting spectrum, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. I'm renting an old condo unit in Manila near our school. The age of the building is evident, with its peeled off paints on the walls. Rent is cheap, so it was convenient for me, and there are security guards on post as well. One night, I stayed out late with a couple of my friends and went home at around 4 a.m. During that time, the elevator was already turned off, as per management rules, so I had to take the stairs to my unit on the 5th floor. I was on the 2nd floor and was about to reach the 3rd floor when I realized I was back on the 2nd floor again. I didn't think about it much because maybe I was just tired and sleepy at that time, but the same thing happened a week after in just about the same hour. Although this time, I noticed I went from the 3rd floor and directly to the 4th floor, skipping the 3rd floor. Then, another creepy thing happened. My room is adjacent to an unoccupied unit, so I can see that unit from my window. One night at 12 a.m., I saw the lights in the other unit turned on. I knew there weren't any occupants there, but I didn't pay much attention to it, thinking it was just a glitch or something. However, I avoided looking out of the window in that direction, afraid that maybe someone or something might look back at me. The most frightening thing that happened to me in this unit was one night at exactly 3 a.m. I was studying at the time when I heard someone crying outside. I just ignored it, thinking that it was my imagination. The cry grew louder. I mustered my courage and peeked through the people on my door. To my surprise, the lights were out. I hurried to the phone and called security in the lobby to check the lights on the 5th floor. I was shocked to hear the guard telling me that the lights are on, as per the CCTV. I said it can't be on because I'm looking at it now. It is off. So another security guard went up to check. I put down the phone and continued to study. After a few minutes, one of the security guards called. He said the lights are on, and the other security guard is currently there, checking the lights, and nothing is wrong. Hearing this, I hurriedly looked at the door peephole and saw that the light was still off. How can this be? I told the guard on the phone that it is still off, and I'm looking at it from my door's peephole now. The guard told me to stay there, and another guard on duty will come to my room and check. After a few minutes, he told me to open the door because the guard sent to me was already there outside my unit and knocking. I froze in fear at that time. I don't hear any knocking. It was at this moment when I realized it was too quiet in my room. Normally, I would still hear the sounds of vehicles from outside. I don't know what to do. Should I open the door? It seems that the guard is not even joking. I decided not to open the door and went to my table to continue my study. That's when I realized something is really wrong. When I looked at my book, it was not the book I was studying. I am 100% sure I was not reading calculus at that time. And I suddenly hear movements in the empty room adjacent to me. It seems like people were having a party because I could hear glasses clinking, footsteps, and the sound of the television. However, I couldn't hear any voices. Even though I was curious, I didn't manage to look out my window. A few seconds later, I felt nauseous. I saw the room distorted, as if it was turned into a bubble, inflating and deflating before my eyes. I couldn't move, can't scream nor make a sound. I was very scared, and I smelled a hint of tobacco in the air. The idea of the copper quickly popped into my head. I didn't know why I suddenly thought of that, but my grandmother used to tell me about it, so that was why I usually smell cigar in the fire exit whenever I would go there to throw away garbage. I haven't seen any tenants smoking there, as far as I know. With this bit of information about the hellish thing that is happening, I gathered my strength and managed to turn my shirt inside out. That's when the weird thing stopped. I remembered what my grandmother told me. When you get lost in the forest, wear your shirt inside out, so you can find your way back. I didn't know why I did it that night, but it sure worked. Hello all. I'm glad you guys enjoyed my previous story. I suppose I will have to make a series out of this. After reading some of the responses, it seems I need to make certain things clear. I am very aware that life in Southeast Asia, at the time and in the setting of my story, was not all about hunting and gathering, or living in the bushes. I apologize if you were led to believe that. Roads and cities and large settlements with regular jobs were very existent. However, please recall that I did not specify my ethnicity. Having said that, there exist well over 50 indigenous and ethnic minority groups living throughout Southeast Asia. I suppose I'll have to reveal that I am one of those, and that my own people lived mainly as nomads, hunting, gathering, farming the land, and moving from location to location as a way of life. I hope this clears things up a bit. Getting back to my stories, picking up right where I left off. As the conversation continued, the elders began talking about the creatures they claimed either they themselves had seen or had been recounted by friends or relatives. One of the more interesting stories, and mainly because it included a creature I hope truly exists, revolved around a giant ape-like creature. In short, Sasquatch. The fascinating thing about this cryptid is that many countries seem to have their own version of it. In Australia, it is referred to as Yowie. In South Africa, Waterbaby Jan. In the Himalayas, Yeti. In Mongolia, Amos. In Sumatra, Orang Penduk. In South America, Marpangari. In China, Yiwu. And even the past suggests a potential ancestor/relative in Gigantopithecus, the largest primate known to have ever existed. The best part? Scientists cited one of Gigantopithecus' geographical areas to be in Vietnam. So you can guess how excited I was when I learned my people possessed stories of a Sasquatch-like creature in that region. I listened in intently as one of the elders recounted the story of when he was a boy and a claymore had sprung at the entrance of their village. It was nearing dusk, and when he went to go investigate, he recognized it was his uncle and his hunting party returned after several days of being in the forest. But something seemed off. The party of four had a particular look on their faces, and one of them was quite agitated. It had happened that very morning. Their hunting excursion had been successful, and they were on their way back home. The men had been happy since they were able to procure meat, and even more so that nothing bad happened to them. But early that morning, when light had barely broken, the disturbed member woke up to a very robust stench. He quietly sat up and peered around to locate the source of the smell. Across their camp, where their meat was hung to prevent any animals getting to it. Frozen with fear, the man could only stare. But the creature never turned around, nor took any notice of them. After some time, it ripped off the carcass it was feeding from and simply left. The man then woke up the rest of the group and explained what had just transpired. The elder said he had never seen someone shake so bad in his entire life. His story was validated by the others, as one of the carcasses was indeed gone. And the members in the group, having already heard stories about the creature, they took to leaving their camp hastily and returned home as fast as possible, in fear it would return. Several more stories of a Sasquatch-like creature followed after, but none I found interesting or palpable enough to bother recording. The conversation then steered towards forest spirits. Now, to be clear, the word spirit in my culture is used to refer both the physical and the ephemeral. In fact, it can be said it is used to refer to all supernatural and cryptid beings, so please do not be confused. Getting back on, another elder recounted his story of a relative traversing through the night and meeting a stranger on the road. This relative, accompanied by his wife and parents, had gone to visit his in-laws in another village, but the two villages were far from one another. By foot, it took an entire day, and on the last leg of their journey, it had gone dark, something you most definitely hoped never happened when you traveled. If you do not remember from my previous post, nearly all of these villages are secluded, with no electricity, no running water, and no asphalt or concrete roads. It is all forest and darkness. But the man had his parents traveling with him, and they were elderly. They could not walk at a pace that would only require a day of travel, and they had to rest often. It was in the middle of the night, when they were wading through the jungle, that they happened upon another person. Immediately, this set off bells in their heads. It was very well known that no one ever traveled during this time. It was considered lunacy. Thankfully, they were in a group large enough to be comforted by one another. And upon encountering this man, the father of the group stepped forward to greet him. The elder then spoke in exchange as it happened.
Thank the heavens. I am so glad I ran into a group of people.
The man said.
I was on my way home from the nearby village when it got dark and I got lost. I was getting very afraid.
The father then spoke usually. Calm your heart. You are indeed fortunate to have run into us. We are on our way home as well. You are free to join us if you like, he said.
Thank you. Thank you, Senior. Are you headed to said village?
The man said. We are. Are you also on your way there? The father asked. The man then gave a dismayed look.
I am sorry, Senior. It is not. My home is nearby, and I must find the path that leads back to it,
He said. Ah, that is too bad. We will have to separate then, as it is dark, and we must go as fast as possible, the father said. But in fear of being by himself again, the man beckoned to them.
I beg you, Senior. I do not want to be by myself. At the least, please stay with me until I find the path back to my house,
He said. You are by yourself. It is hard. We will stay with you until you find your path back home, the father obliged him. His family, however, was skeptical, but as he was the elder of the group, they did not protest. As they walked, the man made small talk with them. He asked about his family and his son and daughter-in-law. The father answered all of the man's questions for them. Eventually, almost on a whim, the man suddenly stated he recognized where they were and knew how to get home from there. It is good. I am very happy for you. And now that you have found your way, we must go, the father relayed. The man objected, however.
Senior, it is dark, and my house is near. You do not have to suffer this. I will offer my house for you to sleep in, and have my wife prepare food for you,
He said. The father thanked him, but declined.
I insist, Senior. Why, I bet you probably don't have enough food to eat for the rest of the way if you and your family decide to rest again,
The man said. The father then turned to his wife and motioned for a parcel of banana leaves from her straw basket. We have plenty of food, you see. We have rice and meat and vegetables, he said as he showed the man parcel after parcel after parcel. The man then gave him a disapproving look.
Ah, it is good, but I insist. Again, it is late and too dark to see. Please come rest in my house.
The man kept pushing, but the father kept refusing him. Thank you, but do not worry. Our village is very close by now. We will keep going, the father said. Knowing he would not succeed, the man finally relented.
I see. Then thank you again. Thank you, thank you. And travel safe, Senior.
The man said and took off. The family then resumed their walking. Husband, was he a... the wife began to say. Not now. Just keep walking, he silenced her. Finally, after some time, and to their great relief, the edge of the village materialized. Father, was he a forest spirit? The daughter-in-law decided to ask him, just as curious as her mother-in-law, and believing it was now safe to ask. I don't know for sure, but there is a good chance he was. No one lives in the jungle, he responded. I am glad we still had food with us. What do you mean, Father? She inquired. Daughter-in-law, do you think the only reason we give food to our relatives traveling from far is so they do not starve on their journey back home? No, it is also in case they encounter spirits who will try to trick them and to maybe get them lost. I showed him our food, so he would stop insisting we go with him, he explained. Ah, I see, she said. When the elder finished his story, I finally understood why my own relatives were so intent on packing us food on our way back home when I was still a child. I always believed it to be done out of custom and courtesy, but the elder's origin story revealed its true meaning. although, I admit, I wish I had remained ignorant to this. The reasoning behind it is quite disturbing. Still, after some time after the revelation, I found it strange that the jester was still performed today by my people despite no longer living in the old country. Some things are just done out of habit now, I suppose. This is all for now. Thank you for listening. My girlfriend and I moved to an apartment in Colombo. It was a 2-story building and our apartment was on the rooftop. In the first few weeks of our stay there, I began to experience strange events. There were several times where I could hear a man whistling a merry tune, and on some occasions, I hear people conversing in the middle of the afternoon. I didn't pay attention to it at first, but as days passed, I decided to tell my girlfriend about it. To my surprise, she too had the same experiences, but was hesitant to tell me as well. She said she would sometimes catch a glimpse of someone rushing to the door. One time, her elder sister came to visit us. The spooky thing was that on her first day of staying with us, she said she could sense something in the house. Not something to be afraid of, because it is in fact guarding the house. We were shocked to hear these things from her, because we hadn't yet told her about the odd things that happened to us. Things turned for the worse when we started to hear scratching. Something that sounded like it is crawling or walking on the roof. Sometimes we would hear thuds. I already have hints that it's an oswine. Being protective of my girlfriend, I was so angry that I would curse at it whenever I would hear these sounds. I got 2 handguns with me, a 38 and a 45, a samurai, and a number of knives because I was fond of collecting these kinds of things. When I hear the strange sounds on the roof, I would arm myself and get out of the house. I would throw stones on our roof, ready to shoot anything that may come out of the shadows. One night, I heard my Spitz dog crying in the middle of the night. I tied him at the back door at the time. When I realized that the thing was out there again, I slowly approached the door. I heard a strange noise, but I can't pinpoint where it was coming from. It sounded something like I was told that the oswang sounds far when it is near you. My dog was really scared, with her body pressed against the back door crying. I was waiting for the right moment to blow this oswang away. When I clicked on the hammer of my gun, the sound suddenly stopped. I let my dog inside the house to be safe and then returned to bed. And just minutes later, we heard the rattling on our roof again. It was past midnight. I was pissed, took my gun again, and went outside. I cursed, and nothing seems to be there on the roof. We decided to get some garlic and salt and throw it on the roof and around the house. We had some garlic tied to our doors and some on our windows. The strange rattling sound stopped for several months. Then on one moonlit evening, we were outside enjoying a conversation when my girlfriend pointed at something flying. It has a brown color, and it was huge, like the size of a dog, I think. We can't make anything out of it, but we are sure it's not any kind of bird. It was about 100 meters away from us and flying slowly, fortunately, not in our direction. We ran inside the house and locked the doors. Today, I sleep with my guns and my knives beside me. From the time that I got married, I wasn't able to visit our house where I lived when I was young. It was my mother's family's house. Only my grandfather lives there now. My father already passed away, and my mother is now working abroad. Because my mother was able to save up from her work as an OFW, she decided to have our house renovated. That house was already old anyway. There were places where water leaked when it's raining, and some of the doors were not anymore that sturdy. I remembered I was pregnant then. I was about 8 months. My husband and I decided to visit our house, and my grandfather, who was living there, I'm sure he would be very glad to see me. We asked permission from my mother-in-law if my husband and I could stay at my grandfather's place while the construction was going on. It will only be for a few days. My grandfather didn't have any help to manage the construction process, so it would be a big help for him if we were to visit. It was a relief that my mother-in-law agreed. When we arrived there, my grandfather was so delighted to see us. Well, I didn't tell him beforehand that we would come, so he would be surprised. We had a quick conversation to catch up, and then we started to unpack. Before settling for the night, my husband and I looked around the house. We noticed that the construction would still take a while to finish. Half of the house had still incomplete roofing. My husband felt a bit uneasy staying in the house with minimal security. Because of the construction, robbers might find a way to get in easily. So, my husband and I asked some of the workers if they could stay for the night with us in the house. 2 of the workers agreed because their houses were not too far from ours, and they personally knew my grandfather as well. So the 2 of them went home for a moment, then returned to our house to stay the night. We had a good night's sleep that night. The following morning, we noticed that one of the workers seemed worn out while he was hammering. We asked him if he was alright, or maybe he's not in good condition to work. He said he is alright, just a bit lacking in sleep. He was one of the 2 workers who stayed in the house last night, so we got word. We asked him if he wasn't comfortable in his bed, or maybe the blanket that we gave him was too thin. I was puzzled because what he said to us was that he wasn't able to fall asleep last night because he felt very uneasy. The same kind of troubled feeling was also experienced by the other worker who slept in the house with him. Both of them felt very uneasy, but they can't seem to pinpoint what it is nor see anything out of the ordinary. I'm not a believer of unusual encounters, especially if I can't physically see it. So I said, maybe you're just tired and just felt uneasy being in another's house. This feeling of uneasiness to sleep in another person's house is locally known as namamahe. Still, we asked them if they could still sleep in the house, and we will just dismiss their work early so they can have more time to rest. They agreed. On the second night, the same thing happened. They felt very uneasy, so they can't sleep. The same kind of feeling they had the other night. However, this time they saw something. According to them, as they lay in their beds to sleep, they felt that someone or something was slowly going towards them. Their surroundings seemed to be so heavy, and when they turned around, they saw what seemed to be a huge shadow. Upon seeing it, they hurriedly turned on the lights to see what it was, but it disappeared instantly the moment the lights were on. We felt nervous because we thought that it might be a robber. They said that they were already scared. So on the third night, there were only the 3 of us, me, my husband, and my grandfather, who slept in the house. During that night, my husband and grandfather also began to feel uneasy. They didn't experience this kind of feeling the nights before. My husband could not fall asleep either, and my grandfather started to have nightmares. Luckily, we slept in one room, so we were able to wake him up, but as for me, I could sleep just fine. I think everything was just normal for me. Maybe it didn't have any effect on me, because I'm not an easily scared person. However, my husband and my grandfather were like that for several nights. On our last night there, my grandfather still can't fall sound asleep. After a moment, we heard some footsteps on the roof. It was about 3 a.m. that time. My husband feared that it was really a robber, but I said, maybe, but it could just be a cat. But it also seemed impossible for it to be a cat because the footsteps were so loud, as if a big person was walking on the roof. After a while, the footsteps stopped. However, it was followed by weird noises in the back of our house. It sounded as if a dog was digging something in our backyard. We were scared then because of the weird sounds it was making and the moaning of whatever it is. So creepy sounding. The sound continued for about 30 minutes. Then it stopped. After that, we just tried our best to sleep. The following morning, some workers called us to the back of the house. There, we saw that the compiled gravels were scattered all about. What was even weirder was that there was also gravels and some mud marks that were shaped like feet on our roof. So we figured that the weird commotion last night was not caused by a dog because it doesn't have any way to go up on the roof. It was too high, and it wouldn't explain the feet marks either. There were no robbers as well, because no doors nor locks were forcefully opened. There were no missing items in the house either. Surprisingly, we heard news around the neighborhood that some of our neighbors also had odd mud marks on their roofs. The same thing with what we saw on our roof. People think that a tick-tick was roaming the night. Because of the mysterious things that happened, we asked my cousin if he could stay with my grandfather while the house is under construction. My husband and I needed to go back to my mother-in-law's house. From the time that we left, nothing weird happened in the house ever since. My family is renting 2 apartments in Mumble City. The apartments are just beside each other. What we did is put a passage at the back so we can go through our second apartment. Anyway, I was with my 2 children and my parents. We had a relative. She's about 50 years old, I think, taking care of my younger child, who was about 2 months old. Each apartment had 2 bedrooms, and the room of my younger sister is at the second apartment. On that day, there's no one in the second apartment, since my sister went out for a party. It was past midnight when my relative decided to go to the first apartment with my baby. Suddenly, they heard someone saying, "Walk, walk," several times, which was then imitated by my baby. When they were already inside our first apartment, She asked her daughter, who was living with us, if she was the one who said those words. Her daughter denied it. She said she had just went down from upstairs. The next night, my baby was in the living room, playing with my youngest sister. My sister said that she saw my baby covering her eyes for a long time and wasn't moving around like she used to do because she is always hyperactive. In that moment, my baby was just still. Then she pointed at something by the door. My sister turned around but saw nothing. When my sister went to carry her, my baby held on very tight. Then my sister finally decided to let my baby down, but my baby's legs were wrapped around my sister. My baby held on for about 10 minutes. Several days after, during siesta time, my relative, who was taking care of my baby, then decided to close her eyes and rest for a while, letting my baby play inside the room. They were sleeping in the same room. She was surprised that my baby wasn't moving around and making any noise. So, she opened her eyes to check on my child. She then saw my baby covering her face with a pillow. She was like that for about 5 minutes, a relative said. It was very weird. Are oswings always in solid form? I mean, there are ones who can shapeshift into animals, insects, or such. Or is it another supernatural being lurking inside our house? We just thought that the thing my baby saw had to be something so scary that she was covering her eyes for so long. The story happened when I was in my elementary level. It was a summer vacation then, and me and my siblings always spend our vacation at May Titus's house in Project 2, Quezon City. I don't know how to describe the whole place, but there was a big tree besides the house itself. Every time we stayed there, our room was located at the left side of the house, which is near the window where you can view the tree. When you look outside, you will see other houses, but the old tree blocked most of the views. When you go outside the house, you will see the big playground next to the tree where we played. The maid also hangs there, and if ever there is a party, the party is also held there as well. One night, it all changed into something I never anticipated. I was preparing myself to go to sleep. My sisters and cousins were still in the other room watching a cartoon movie. My aunt and Tito were not yet home at the time because they attended a party, and the maid was already in her room. I did not notice that the window in front of the tree was wide open. It suddenly crashed. Really, I was surprised, but I was not scared specifically, and I could hear the voices of my cousin and sister shouting, and some neighbors outside. Then a bit of wind. When I had this thought of closing the window that night, something felt off. So I went to the room of the maids and asked the yaya to close it for me. When she is about to close it, we both heard some puffing. Just like puffing of a person who is smoking. We just look at each other, but didn't talk about it. She still continues to close the window, Then she goes back to her room, and I lay down in our bed. That time, I am still alone in the room. A few minutes later, as I was just starting to fall asleep, I heard a weird voice. A voice of a large man who seems to be coughing or saying, "Ugh." It is like someone or something clearing its throat. And it was very lucid and creepy. Then again, I heard the puffing. What is very frightening now is he is tapping outside of the window as if someone is knocking. But who is it? No one is on the second floor with me in that room. The lights in the room were already off, and the curtain of the window is not that thick, so you can still spot the shadow outside, especially if there were lights outside, or if the moon is very bright or clear, like a full moon. You can see any shadow outside of the window. The creepy noise is getting louder and louder to the point that I can't take it anymore. I quickly stand from the bed, and there I saw the shadow of a very large hand. Can you imagine it? The shadow of not only a large, almost inhumanly large hand, but with the shadow of fur around the hand. Imagine that. The gigantic hand was tapping, something like knocking outside the window still. I was stunned. I really don't know what to do this time. I was so scared. I peed myself. I swear, I experienced that. And I couldn't even shout to call anybody in the house. It sent blood pumping through my veins. I just stared at the shadow of this hand. I could not move. It was stiff. And then I fainted. I knew what happened. The next morning, when I woke up, they were all in front of me. It's my aunt and cousins and sisters. I had a high fever. Then I told them what happened. My aunt knew about the copper, but she didn't mind me at all, just shrugged and never saw fear. My aunt knew about the copper, but she hid it from her children because they would be scared, of course, but because of what happened to me. Simply, my cousins also found out, and because I told them about it. One more thing. There was a time that the maid was at the laundry room when she smelled a tobacco smoke coming from that tree. The laundry room was an open area at the back of every apartment where the tenant could place and dry their clothes from direct sunlight. It doesn't have elevated walls, so you could easily see the tree there. We would light dead grasses in this time of night. The following month, Matilda found a new place for them. For those who are not familiar with the Capri, a Capri is a creature that could be characterized as a tree demon, but with more human characteristics. It is described as being a 7 to 9 foot tall, brown, hairy male with a beard. Capris were normally depicted or described as smoking a big tobacco pipe, whose strong smell would attract human attention. People say we shouldn't be scared of the dark. It's because we cannot appreciate light without it. But what if there is someone or something supernatural in the dark, staring at you, waiting for the perfect opportunity to unfold their bad motives onto you? Will you still feel safe and unafraid of the dark? My name is Sam, and this is another scary story from my childhood. When I was 8 years old, we were living in a not-so-secluded place with only a few people in it. That was way back in 2007, in a village located in Pampanga. During that time, that village was not too populated. The distance of the houses were far from one another. When we moved to that place, our neighbors always told us to stay at home when the night strikes. As an 8-year-old boy, I didn't question that. I just followed what they told us. My mother died when I was 6 years old, so my father worked hard in order to support us financially. Only my sister, Melody, took care of us. My father seldom went home because he was working in Olongapo. Our life there was just normal at first. We had a very simple life. We always fetched water from the water pump, which was 2 minutes on foot from our house. We always did that before the evening fell. In the evening, it was very scary to go outside because it was dark and the village didn't have a lot of light posts. One night, around 10 or 11 p.m., my sister's brother and I were singing at home. We loved singing together. We were all sleeping in one room with a very big window. The window was made of metal grills. We turned off the light in our room because we were about to sleep at that time. Outside our house, there was a light post, so we could see if there was someone standing outside our house. We were all singing when we suddenly saw a shadow of a lady outside the house. We thought it was our neighbor Jane. The lady had very long, curly hair based on her shadow. We called her.
Mary Jane? Is that you?
She didn't respond. She just walked away, which was very odd because we were close to her. We continued singing. 5 minutes later, the lady went back on that same spot. We called her again, thinking that maybe she didn't hear us earlier.
Mary Jane, go get your clothes. I think it is going to rain in a bit.
But for the second time, we didn't get any response from her. She walked away again. That was the time when we started panicking. We heard a lot of scary stories from our neighbors when we moved to that place. One of our neighbors told us that when she was pregnant, she was always being followed by an old woman in the evening, especially when she went outside to buy something from the store. She also heard some weird noises on the roof of their house, as if there was some creature trying to make a hole using its claws. We were all scared, but we were just staring at each other. No one wanted to say anything. Maybe we just didn't want to freak each other out. My sister said,
Chill, guys. Maybe Mary Jane didn't hear us. Tomorrow we will talk to her.
A few minutes passed when the lady went in front of our window again, this time closer. All of us didn't try to utter any words. We just stared at the creepy shadow outside. Suddenly, we saw the lady, or should I say, creature, spread its wings, covering our window. We heard the flapping sound of her wings. We all shouted in fear. My sister took us to pray and pray. We didn't stop praying. To tell you honestly, I didn't try to open my eyes, even after praying. We didn't even realize that we already fell asleep. The next day, we talked to Mary Jane. She told us that she was at her room the whole night. We told her everything that happened that night. To our surprise, she was not shocked. She just told us that the one we saw was a Mananingle, a winged, vampire-like creature that hunts babies or children to suck their blood. A lot of people nowadays don't believe in Oswings, shapeshifters. At first, I didn't believe that they were true, but seeing a winged creature outside our window says it all. Now that my siblings and I are all grown-ups, we just laugh when we remember this memory. I can't help but wonder, where are the Oswings now? Do they still go outside to hunt for prey? How about you? Have you seen a Mananingle before? If you were in the same situation, would you dare to go outside to check what was in front of the window? Thank you so much for listening. Feel free to share your thoughts about Oswings. Hello everyone. In part 3, I wish to depart from the jungle theme and stories. Instead, I'd like to discuss shaman and their powers. I can say that I've met very few in my lifetime. That is, I've met very few whom I believed were authentic. You see, in many cultures that still practice animism, it's customary for a payment to be given to the shaman for their services. Because of this, you can imagine how many phony ones exist out there, and why I've come to my conclusion. In others, however, payment is not customary, and sometimes even strictly forbidden. But even if payment is allowed, it can only be in certain forms. If the payment is something like favor or promised rank, or something beyond reason, it will gesture for punishment. The penalties can vary, but some include loss of powers, death in the family, insanity, seizures, a series of terrible misfortune, and or falling into a coma or coma-like state, among other things. In my travels, I met one that was very attuned to the spirits. I was introduced to her by two friends, a couple of my age. To my surprise, she was one of the nicest and most modern shaman I have ever met, whereas most I have spoken to exhibit signs of arrogance. I say this, but by no means were any of these individuals insufferable to speak to, nor display this trait in overabundance. The shaman was not born here. She was of the old country. She was a refugee of the Vietnam War, and she had come to the U.S. young enough to learn and have good English. She had 3 children and was divorced. I never asked her, but at one point she remarked that her husband had left her because he was tired of the strange things that constantly occurred around them. She was also shunned because she refused to accept any recompense for her services. In addition, she did things different than what was accustomed to when it came to rituals. When I asked her for more details, she responded by saying what I entailed in my introduction. She was not doing this for money, nor fame, nor status. She was doing it because if she didn't, she would go insane. A story I will later recount for you all in this post. She then joked that of her 3 children, her daughter also bore the gift. I didn't press on the comment, but remained guarded. I didn't ask how she obtained her powers, as I already had my suspicions, and I suppose I should reveal it to those of you unfamiliar. Shaman are chosen, and it is done so in various ways. It is, for the most part, appropriated through dreams and visions. Sometimes, an individual will suffer a series of horrible nightmares. Sometimes, as they are dreaming, the spirits, an ancestor or otherwise, will speak to them, and sometimes a sequence of terrible things will happen to them. These are but a few examples, but once these things escalate to a point no longer bearable, or an individual comes forward about suffering these symptoms, it is then that another shaman will be brought in to perform a reading, and if it is indeed realized that these individuals have been chosen to become shaman, they are to begin their training at their compliance and acceptance of the role. One can always refuse, I was told, but I have never heard of such a case. To detail them further, shaman heal not only by chanting, praying, and blessing, but in more involved cases by also going into a trance where they travel to the spirit world to negotiate with the gods or spirits, or, if it comes to it, do battle. The particulars are different from people to people, but this is the gist of it. Getting back to the story, the shaman spoke casually about spirits she occasionally encountered. She expressed that she found them anywhere and everywhere, some even in her house. I then decided to ask her why she was able to encounter so many. It's simple, she answered. It's because funeral rites haven't been performed on these wandering souls. I asked her to please elaborate. Don't you find it strange that every single culture and people on Earth holds some sort of funeral rite for their deceased? She asked me. I didn't answer. It's so the souls can move on to their afterlife, she said. Her reasoning made sense, if you believe in that ideology. And although I could have brought up the subject of atheists and their beliefs, I did not. In the end, you can't change the mind of someone who absolutely believes chocolate is the best ice cream flavor. When you're trying to explain to them, it's vanilla. It results in nothing but arguing, and I was not about to waste my time doing that. She then reveled in the story.
A few months ago, I was returning home from work. It was night, and on the way home I saw a man standing by himself at an intersection. He seemed confused, so I stopped to talk to him. She began.
I raised an eyebrow at her bravery and ignorance for having stopped to talk to a stranger in such a particular setting. She carried on.
"Excuse me, are you okay?"
She asked him after cracking her window open. The man did not answer her. He kept peering around, as though looking for something. She tended to him again.
I'm sorry. I seem to be lost. I'm trying to get home, but for some reason, I can't leave this place.
He said, his face clearly disturbed. She knew what he was immediately and asked him what had happened.
I think I died here in a car accident,
he answered her. She then told me she remembered that there indeed had been a fatal car accident at that intersection a while ago.
"Do you have any family?"
She decided to ask him next.
just a sister, but I can't remember where she lives,
he responded. She made an educated assumption of his answer and ascertained that his sister had probably not given him a proper funeral.
"I will go and get you some help."
She then relayed to him and left. The following day, she brought her effects, or tools, and performed a small ritual at the intersection and sent him away. She never saw him again after. Something didn't add up for me, however, so I decided to inquire. You're able to send anyone to the afterlife, regardless of their religion or religious beliefs? I asked her. She shook her head.
"I don't send souls to their respective hells or heavens. I simply send them from this plane. Once they are moved on, it is the job of those in the next world to sort them,"
she answered. Her explanation wasn't entirely without reason, and somehow universally wholesome, I found it. The conversation then continued discussing her stronger senses, which I will not entail here, as her explanation was not entirely different from what we know from mainstream media. I then asked her if she had ever encountered any malevolent spirits.
"Several, actually. But now I know how to protect myself against them. And they're not as terrible as you probably think. The worst was probably before I learned I had powers. It happened around the time I hit puberty. At that time, my aunt and uncle lived in a duplex,"
she said. She was an orphan. Her parents had been killed in the war, and her relatives had taken her in.
The house had a long hallway, and I began seeing this shadowy figure whenever I went into it. At first, it didn't reveal itself in its entirety. It peeked from the corners and doorways at me, and it was a long time before it got bolder. It wasn't too long after that. It would come visit me at night, and eventually, it started talking to me. I think it started becoming hostile because I would not respond to it, she said. She then explained how things began small. The usual doors closing, items missing, lights flickering, until it became aggressive. Malevolent spirits
In contrast to their Hollywood counterpart, manifested both physically and mentally, she began to experience terrible, reoccurring nightmares that she refrained from sharing with me.
I kept it all to myself. We are raised to be disciplined, yes? I did not want my aunt and uncle to think I was a bad girl, as it was the belief of our people at that time. But that was stupid of me, because it just kept getting worse and worse. I did not know what was happening to me. I was losing sense of time, and I was having difficulty perceiving what was real. But my aunt and uncle weren't blind to my changing behavior. They noticed and confronted me. I told them everything. I was eventually brought to a shaman who performed a reading. He stated a house spirit had latched onto me, but he also said it was revealed that I was chosen, hence why I was able to see the spirit so vividly.
Upon those words, I asked if she was willing to describe the spirit. She smiled at me without responding, but she needed to, as her eyes answered for her. I didn't press on the matter. In the end, a ritual was performed to sever the bindings of the spirit. A cleansing of the house was also carried out, and the entire family was given string bracelets blessed by the shaman and meant to conceal their presence from spirits. Soon after, she began her apprenticeship in shamanism. Our conversation continued, but nothing relevant enough followed after that warrants mentioning. And eventually, I deemed we had taken enough of her time and decided to leave. Right before we stood to leave, however, her lovely daughter, who seemed about the age of 3, walked up to my lady friend and caressed her belly. She then uttered the words, "Baby," and we glanced at each other with odd expressions. My friends were pregnant, and they had let me know, but she was not yet showing, nor was she of size to make such an assumption. If it didn't happen in front of me, I swear I would have never believed it. I looked over at the shaman, who simply smiled at me. I left her home in a state of wonderment. That's all for now, folks. It's late, and I must sleep. Thank you for listening, and see you all in the next story. I still remember up to now. I was about 4 or 5 when my first encounter with a white lady happened. Our house in the Philippines was a 3-story house, and it's kind of old. My grandmother even told me that it's been there since my mom was still a baby. I needed to go to the bathroom so bad, but our lights in the hallway were all off. I was going to go downstairs, but then I couldn't help it anymore. So when I was about to turn off the light, and I was about to step out of the bathroom behind me seemed like the lights turned on again, but I was sure that I turned them off. And when I tried to look back, there was a girl wearing white, and her hair was covering her face. I could only see her eyes, and she had sharp nails. Lydia was about to put her sharp hands on my shoulders when I started screaming and went back to our room. I told my mom about it, but as all parents tell little kids, she said that it must have just been my imagination. When I asked my great-grandmother the next day, she told me that I just have to get used to it because of the oldness of our house. She also said that it was probably a Japanese girl looking for her daughter. She told me that before they bought the house a long time ago, which was around the time of the Japanese people in our country, she said that the landlord already told her about a pregnant Japanese lady who died in that house. My great-grandmother also mentioned that she always sees this girl. She said that the girl doesn't harm anyone. And as I grew up, I saw the same lady a couple of times, but I never dared to go near her or even try to talk to her. I don't think I can do that yet. Hello again, all. I'm a little excited for part 4. Browsing through my collections, I found an entry that rendered me particularly enthusiastic to write about. I hope you will enjoy it. Several years ago, in another one of my trips to Southeast Asia, I thought I would attempt to get into contact with some of the region's ethnic minority groups to collect some of their stories. I hired a guide from a reputable agency and made sure to make my intentions very clear to him. Again, as a very superstitious folk, certain activities have to be revealed before they can be accepted. There is nothing worse than masking your intentions until you've arrived at your destination, only to be met with potential hostility by your guide for having been deceived and involuntarily involved in something precarious, even dangerous. Thankfully, I was fortunate to have been obliged. We set forth on our destination to a group that lived 4 hours in the mountains. I'll skip some detail here for the sake of keeping things short and skip right to where I met the village elder. It is a great sign of disrespect, and some trust must be earned before such things can be inquired. And so my day was spent making small talk and drinking. Lots and lots of drinking. A custom I've come to recognize is shared by many indigenous and ethnic minority groups of the region. I'll save more embarrassing details here and fast forward to that night. The alcohol did as it was intended to and helped me gain the elders' and village's trust. I was invited to stay the night and was beyond thrilled to have been offered. We were in the elder's hut, sitting around a small fire with his family scattered about. By this time, I had already asked about their customs, which I have just as much interest in, and decided to finally change the topic. I asked him very carefully and respectfully for permission to talk about darker things. I made sure to add that I meant to offend no one, and that I would only pry if he deemed it safe to do so. I also asked him for permission to record these things if he decided to agree. I probably had the alcohol to thank, as he accommodated my requests and asked me what questions I had for him. I simply stated that I wanted to know if there were any rules they had to abide by to be kept safe from bad spirits. The following is my retelling of our conversation. altered to make as much sense as possible due to the imperfect English of my interpreter. Hence, please be understanding of this.
We have a lot, actually, he began. We teach our children of these things young because we do not want the spirits to take them away. We tell them not to go in the forest by themselves and not to talk to people they don't recognize from our village. We tell them not to follow lights in the middle of the night and never chase after animals.
His last comment had me curious, so I asked him if he could elaborate.
Some animals are not animals. They are spirits, or sometimes they are the pets of the gods living in the jungle. They sometimes come to our village because they are curious, but sometimes the children will not listen and try to catch them for fun. One time, a red monkey came to our village to look. A child found him beautiful and chased after it. He followed it into the jungle and never came back out. The jungle had taken him,
he said. And then I asked him, is there any way to tell if these animals are pets, or good, or bad spirits?
No,
He answered.
we can only guess, but it's never good to try and catch these animals, so we teach our children to just leave them alone,
He said. I then asked him what would happen if they were to accidentally kill such an animal, such as during one of their hunts, for example.
Our village men are very smart. They have lots of experience when they go hunting. If they find an animal that is too pretty, or if it is an animal they have never seen before, they do not shoot. They do not want to make the spirits and the jungle angry. They kill only what they know,
He said. I saw sense in his words. I then asked about their own rules of the jungle, and also about other spirits. He answered in similar fashion to stories of my previous posts.
You cannot just enter the jungle. You have to ask permission. You pray in front of it, and only then do you go in. If you go for hunting, you tell it you're only going in for hunting. If you go for fishing, you tell it you're only going in for fishing. If you do anything else, you will make it angry. And when you leave, you face the jungle and thank it for allowing you to take from it, he said.
Next, I asked if he was afraid of the jungle.
There is always fear, but it is not the jungle itself you have to be afraid of. The things to fear are the bad spirits that live inside of it.
Can you give me examples? Is it safe to talk about them? I asked.
Some are safe, yes. I will tell you about them. Inside are many bad spirits. All the village knows that there is a beautiful lady that lives somewhere in there. Sometimes the hunters will walk so far in the forest they will see her. There is a story of a hunter that got lost and met her. He came out of the forest and told the village what happened, but he had been bewitched by her, and he ran back inside. He kept saying he loved her. He loved her. We never saw him again.
I nodded my head to signify my great interest.
In the forest, You have to listen to the sounds. It is very loud in there. The insects make a lot of noise. When it becomes very quiet, it is when you have to start worrying. You have to start thinking. You have to look around for bad spirits. Or you have to think about what you did wrong to make the jungle mad. Sometimes it gets quiet because you entered somewhere you're not supposed to, like the house of a god. It has happened to our hunters a few times.
I nodded again. Do you have any stories of hunters that went missing? He paused to think.
A long, long time ago, I was still just a boy. One day, some men went to go hunting. When they returned, one of them was missing. They said the man had seen his son, who had gotten lost in the forest a few years ago. He was yelling, "Son, son!" But the boy kept running. They tried to tell him to come back, but he would not listen. A bad spirit tricked him. He also did not come back.
I wanted to ask more. When one of his wives, carrying a grandchild, interjected, "You should not talk about that. You will bring bad luck to our hunters," she said. The elder laughed and said he would stop, as I comprehended her meaning. In similarity to Western superstition, she did not want their hunters jinxed. I redirected the conversation back toward forest spirits in respect for her.
Inside, there are some spirits that are not bad. We do not see them a lot because they hide from us. But we have seen them, and when they see us, they run away. They are small, maybe only tall like my hip,
He said as he stood to show me.
They are very dark and have no face. They are very fast. They have a lot of hair all over their bodies, and they carry spears. I think they hunt just like us, but they have never done anything bad to us,
He said. It wasn't until much later, when I had some time to really think about the description he gave, that I labeled these spirits as potential pygmies. I labeled them as such, but please remember that I am no expert. As the night went on, he continued to share his stories. When he mentioned something about making sure you brought nothing back home with you during a trek in the forest. As always, I asked him to elaborate.
There are spirits, bad spirits, that you cannot see. Sometimes they follow you home to see if there are any babies for them to take. If they see a baby, they will come back later and try to kidnap them,
He said. He then explained they hung holy items at all the entryways of their dwellings. I looked to find several dried corn cobs and amulets hung by the entrance and windows. He said it was typical for salt to be thrown in front of these areas for extra protection. If you don't know, salt is perceived as having holy or sacred properties across many cultures. Next, I asked if it was common for spirits to try and enter their premises, but it seemed I had erred, as his head wife muttered something. It was never translated to me, but it sounded like I might have caused offense. Again, I failed to recognize it. Again, I failed to recognize the potential affliction I could cause them. The jinxing thing again.
The village elder said something back to her that didn't sound exactly nice, and then turned back to address me. I made sure to take note of my blunder for future reference.
Something is always trying to enter our houses, so we have to protect it all the time. A shaman blesses our houses and village, but even that is not enough sometimes. There are very powerful spirits that exist out there.
I had the urge to ask for what kind of spirits, but held back again in respect for his wife. It was only by my stupid luck that he decided to continue the conversation.
We put our chickens and pigs away at night so the spirits don't take them. We lock the kitchen.
The kitchen being an entirely different building among some of these groups,
so they also don't get in there. We don't leave food outside or anything that might make bad spirits come to our house at night. Some of them are very bad and can make you very sick. They take the children or the wives or bring bad luck to you.
he said. On the note of spirits potentially making you sick, I wanted to bring up a very sensitive subject to him next. Exorcisms. I wanted to know if they partook in this ritual and highly desired details. Alas, as it is late as I'm writing this, I think I will stop here. I will pick up from where I left off in the next part. Sorry for the cliffhanger. As always, thank you for listening, and my apologies for any grammatical errors. Who of you here enjoys a good ride on their bike? I'm one of those individuals. I usually hop on my bike during dawn or dusk. The air feels cool during those times, and pedal my way to my favorite loop. You will pass through a dam when you ride this loop. The loop is around 3 to 4 kilometers, and it consists of a series of uphill and downhill with twists and sharp turns. While riding my bike one time, I didn't go to my usual path. Instead, I went the other way, knowing it would still lead back to where I started. As I was pedaling my way around the bend, it was about 5 p.m. already, and I'm losing daylight. I was determined to finish on time, so I pedaled hard during the uphill and prepared myself for the sharp turn. The sharp turn is a tricky part of the trail, where, if you lose speed, you can easily get unbalanced and crash. When successful, you cruise below the tall trees of mahogany, facing an almost 2-kilometer straight uphill. Now, as I was about to pull all my might to conquer the sharp turn, my eyes caught something ahead. Then, there it was. A man dressed in a white barong and black slacks. He was far ahead, but I can see clearly how he's dressed. Apart from his clothes, he's not wearing any shoes or slippers, and his slacks are folded up to his knees. He was just there, staring at the distance, not moving a muscle as I slowly approached him from behind. When I was about to pass him, I bowed my head down as if to put all my might to pedaling. I was curious as to who the man might be. I looked over my shoulder immediately when I believed I passed him, when suddenly he was gone. I stopped, breathing heavily, puzzled as to where the man went. He couldn't possibly hide or run that fast for me to lose sight of him. I was quite spooked. I gathered myself and just decided to continue, worried of losing the daylight.
I aligned my pedals to strike a powerful stride. After some time, gaining speed again, I looked on my back. He was not there. I continued pedaling until I saw the same back all over again. It's the same old man with the same clothes. I was terrified when I saw him again, ahead of me. I didn't know how to react to the situation. I was hesitant to continue and pass the man again and experience the same scenario. Hesitating, I stopped and just stared at him at a safe distance. After some time, his ankles became less visible until it reached his knees and his torso, until he was just more like a haze. Terrified, I pedaled so hard on the downhill, I would risk anything rather than continuing after what I have seen. For your information, I didn't crash, and I got home safely. I got home breathing heavily and drenched in sweat. I consulted my family as to what my experience could mean, and why couldn't I see the man's face when I passed him. They informed me it was a form of paranormal activity, wherein a soul of a man who recently died finds its way to the place where he lived. This phenomenon happens during the believed 40 days, wherein the soul is trapped in the present world and cannot proceed to its destination without the offered prayers from his or her loved ones. I asked around my neighborhood if someone had been deceased recently around that area. They confirmed that an old man was robbed and murdered in his hut by a newly released ex-convict a few weeks ago. I guess the soul of that man was still wandering and seeking justice for his doomed fate. I just hope that whenever I get around that trail again, I would not see him again. Praying he got the justice he deserved. Hello everyone. Picking up right where I left off last, you'll all highly be disappointed to know that exorcisms do not happen as we've been taught to believe they do in mainstream media. No, they are very tame, I assure you, and for the most part, they consist of a simple series of blessings or prayers. This is mainly true, regardless of the culture and religion. Trust me, I did my research. Still, I never fail to try and ask, in case I am presented with an extraordinary story. However, it remains an extremely sensitive subject to bring up in highly superstitious communities. Often, it is perceived as a taboo subject, and talking about it beckons bad luck and a possibility to invite the effects. Therefore, I had to be very careful on how I was going to bring this up to the village elder. One more note before I begin. If you recall in the previous post, the elder mentioning how there were bad spirits always entering or attempting to enter the village, it was not in the realm of the impossible for them to see or find me as such. For example, if a child suddenly fell terribly ill during my visitation, it could be attributed to my appearance or presence in the village. I could very well be blamed for it, and then met with unknown hostility if they were to believe the cause to be me. Therefore, I had to tread very carefully. Getting on, by the time I was ready to bring up the subject, the setting had nearly been laid for me. All the signs indicated it was time anyway. The children were being put to bed. The women were finishing up their evening duties, and the alcohol was wearing off to make way for more serious discussion. I turned to my interpreter and told him to relay to the village elder that I wanted to talk about a more delicate subject. I was inquired as to what, and the elder was pleased that I had waited to ask. He told me we could talk about the subject once all the women and children were asleep. It didn't take too long before he, his eldest son, who resided with him, my interpreter, and my guide, and I, to be the only ones left sitting by the small fire.
We can begin.
He permitted me. I thanked him. Is possession something that happens to your people? I dove right in.
It is rare, but it does happen,
He answered. Can you talk about an event? And is it safe to talk about it? I asked, next in my usual method. He nodded, his face then becoming stern.
Many years ago, a boy went to go play in the forest. We always tell our children not to go, but they never listen. At night, he had not come home, so his mother went to go look for him. But everyone said they did not see the boy, so she came to me. She was crying and said a spirit must have taken him. I told her I will ask a shaman the next day to find him. In the morning, the shaman said the boy went to go play in the forest, and a spirit took him. The shaman sacrificed a chicken and begged the jungle to please give him back. He prayed and prayed and sang,
chanted,
for a long time, and the next day the boy came back out. But he was different now. He did not speak or hear. It was like he was not alive. When you talked to him, he did not answer. The shaman then said a bad spirit was inside him. We had to make the spirit come out. The shaman talked to the ancestors, and they said we had to sacrifice 3 chickens and a pig. We put the boy on a table, bench, and gave him
something I could not understand, but I figured were ceremonial items.
to hold. The shaman sang,
Chanted,
and danced around him. He spat
holy or blessed.
water on the boy. He did this for a long time, and then the boy shook
Convulsed,
and fell asleep.
lost consciousness, I clarified with the interpreter.
The boy and an uncle came to hold him, and after some more time, the shaman finished. The boy was still asleep, and when he woke up, the shaman gave him medicine. Every day the boy ate medicine, but sometimes the shaman would dance and sing again. He kept doing this until the boy got better.
He finished. Is the boy fully back to normal now? I asked.
He is good, but he does not remember what happened.
He replied. I asked if I could meet the boy, but the village elder said it was impossible.
The boy's parents had decided to move to another village after the episode. This village was bad luck, they had said, and they no longer wanted to live there.
But even if he was here, I would not let you see him.
The village elder said.
It is not good for the boy, and the parents might get mad. And maybe talking to him might bring the bad spirit back,
he added. Cursing at my ignorance once again, I let the elder's words sink in. It had been a fascinating account, however, and I debated with myself whether I should continue on the topic. I sensed I was on very fragile grounds now after the blunder, but it was difficult for me to let the opportunity pass by. I was going to ask another question pertaining to the subject, but the elder changed the direction of the conversation for me. Once he did, I knew we were done with the subject.
I have a story for you,
he said. Curious, I nodded for him to continue.
In our village, we have a lot of rules. There are spirits everywhere, so we have to be careful. But sometimes the villagers are not careful. They do things to invite bad spirits. Sometimes at night, something will knock at a door. Some people don't know, and they will go open it. When they do that, sometimes they let a spirit in.
He said, not fully understanding. I asked him to give me more details.
When you go to someone's house, you knock on the door, but you also say your name. You always say your name. You tell the people who you are so they know you are not a spirit. If somebody knocks at your door and nobody answers, you have to ask, "Who is it?" before you open it. If nobody answers, then you don't open the door. But the children, they don't know. So they are the ones who always open the door,
he explained. Does it happen often? I asked him.
Yes, it happens a lot. But a lot of the times, it's not bad spirits. It's just naughty or prankster spirits,
he answered.
Does your story involve this? I then asked.
Yes, maybe when I was a boy this happened. I do not remember it, but my elders told me. A young couple was just married. The young man and his wife moved to a new house. They were poor, so the young man went to go hunting with some of the other men in the village. They were going for many, many days. After a long time, the men still did not come home. The wife missed her husband a lot, and she wanted to see him. One night, someone knocked at her door. She thought it was him, so she went to go open it. But when she did, there was no one there. She looked outside, but saw no one and closed the door. Finally, the men came back, and she was very happy to see him. Maybe a couple days later, the young man went to go talk to his father. He looked sick, unusual. The father asked him what was wrong, and he said his wife was different. The father told him to speak, and he said he was scared of his wife. He said when she cooked, she put 3 dishes on the table.
There were only two of them, obviously.
He said sometimes she would look at something for a long time, but when he looked, there was nothing there. He said one day he woke up and she was in the corner talking to the wall. The father said he would talk to a shaman. The shaman went to their house and said there was a bad spirit living with them. The spirit was talking to her and telling her to do many things. The shaman did magic on the house,
A house expulsion.
to make the spirit go away. They also did magic on the wife,
A ritual.
to hide her. After the son and his wife were okay again.
He finished. It was quite the fascinating story, and I was glad he shared it when he did. I'm going to note here, just so that you're all aware, a lot of my conversations did not take place the way I write them. There is a lot of pausing where I must ask for clarification from my interpreters or elders, and oftentimes we end up getting lost in translation. But I've been doing this for a while now, and the mechanics of beliefs are so similarly akin to one another that I am able to grasp what is trying to be expressed. We continued our conversation, but much of it involved stories that you've all already heard. There was one last thing I wanted to try, and I hoped dearly that he would accommodate me. When I saw my opening, I asked him, would you be willing to tell me the scariest thing that has happened to you? I observed him closely in anticipation of his response. I was once more being ignorant, as asking this type of question was once again grounds for jinxing. But I just couldn't help myself when I was presented with such a rare opportunity. It warranted caution, however, as his response could have taken a negative turn.
I don't like to talk about it.
He responded to my partial belief, yet very great dismay.
But this also happened when I was a boy.
He then said, I expressed no emotions, but inside I was truly ecstatic. And then, like a cliche, he refilled the pipe he had been smoking, similar to how fictional, enigmatic characters in film or TV often do, right before a grand revealing or recounting. He began.
One night, I had to get up and use the bathroom. I ate too many hot peppers that day, and I woke up with a stomach ache. It was very dark. When I went outside, the dogs started barking. They always bark.
I should mention here that stray dogs are common in every village. In fact, they are quite rampant despite the lack of food around. But one of their food sources is, to my unfortunate revealing, human feces. Sadly, this fact is somewhat relevant to the story.
You only go outside at night when you really have to. I really had to go, so I went. It was very dark, and only the moon gave me light to see.
Flashlights and lanterns
were a luxury that very, very few possessed at the time.
I walked outside the village. That is where everyone uses the bathroom. There is tall grass there, 3 times the length of a man, and you use the bathroom in there so no one can see you. In there, so no one can see you. It was scary. It was scary, so I wanted to use the bathroom fast. But already I knew something was wrong. The dogs were not following me.
He then mentioned how dogs always seem to know when you need to use the bathroom and followed you so they could clean up your waste once you were finished.
I was scared, but I really had to go. I pulled my pants down and sat. Then I heard something move in the grass. I thought maybe it was a dog. I was really, really scared, so I did not move and listened. The sound kept coming to me. I really thought it was a dog, but then it stopped.
Somewhere in front of me, he gestured.
I looked very hard to see what it was. I looked and looked, but I could not see anything. Then I saw it. It was a woman, a ghost woman. She had dirty hair and a dirty face. She looked crazy, and she had big eyes. She did not close her eyes. She was walking like an animal.
On all fours.
She just kept looking and looking at me. I tried to run and scream, but I could not. I think she used magic on me.
Possibly just frozen with fear.
I was so afraid, and I thought she was going to eat me. She looked at me for a long time, and then she talked to me.
The village elder then paused. From his expression, I figured he was trying to gather himself before continuing.
She asked me if I had a mom and dad. I told her I did. Then she asked me why I was not with them. I told her they were sleeping. Then she came closer to me, and I saw everything. I started to cry. She asked me why I was crying. I told her I was scared, but she told me not to be scared. Then she said,
Do you think I'm a ghost?
I told her yes, but she said she was not. She said she was just looking for her son, and she walked for a long, long time looking for him. When she saw me, she said her son was naughty, and he went to the forest to play, and the bad spirits took him. Nobody wanted to help her, so she went to go look for him by herself. But then she said she could not find him, so she was going to take me. I started to cry harder. I told her to please not take me, but she did not listen. She just kept telling me to.
Come.
She got close to me and she tried to grab me. But then I think her magic stopped working and I could move again. I ran and ran. I ran very fast to my house. I woke up my mom and dad and I cried very hard to them. I told them that I went to go use the bathroom and I saw a ghost. I told them she tried to take me. They told me to calm down, but they also yelled at me for going outside at night. The next day, we went to a shaman who did some magic
Ritual again.
to protect me. I had a lot of bad dreams after, but I got better.
When he finished, I once again observed his expression. He looked in pain as he stared colorlessly into the fire, and I could not help but feel a tinge of guilt for having forced him to recall that experience. I admit I was quite green yet at the time when it came to interviewing people, and I've learned very much since then. If I could go back, I would have asked for his permission first. To my great surprise, however, the village elder decided to continue.
The shaman told me he knew about her. He knew that she walked around the village. She was a person who had become a ghost. He wanted to send her to the afterlife, but he couldn't.
He said. I asked him why.
The shaman needs to know her name, or he needs to know her family and ask for one of her things so he can send her. But he already went to the other villages, and no one knows who she is.
He responded. So she is trapped as a ghost forever then? I responded.
Yes, unless she can find her son and she finds peace. But the forest has his soul, so maybe she will never find him.
He answered. I nodded in acknowledgement. Our conversation carried on, but as I was still reeling in guilt for having had the elder recall a traumatic event, I changed the subjects of our talks. I asked him about village life and his people and their future, things that weren't so selfish to my needs. Our moods changed, and soon we were smiling and laughing again. He spoke with a lot of enthusiasm until I yawned and, being the gracious host that he was, beckoned me to take my rest. I apologized, and he stood and ushered my guide and myself to our beds. The following day I thanked him profusely and asked him what I could do to repay his hospitality, or for a way to help the village. He told me I needed to, but I insisted. He said there was a box at their village's entrance where tourists could donate money to help them, but he said I could also do so by purchasing souvenirs, handmade craft and accessories from their stands. I did both. We said our goodbyes, and the village children ran alongside our vehicle as my guide and I departed. We had a 4-wheel drive back, and I immediately took to my journal, recording all that I have been shared.
before my aging mind could no longer clearly recollect it. The rest of my trip was spent leisurely enjoying the local sights and discovering new tastes and flavors. It was something I routinely did to reground myself to ensure my mind and energies remained balanced. Because when you spend so much time engaged in this stuff, your entire being starts to become more receptive to the surroundings. And I won't deny that sometimes it wrought bouts of paranoia. Of course, at this point, I've exposed myself so much to the field that I remain mainly immune to the effects now. It takes a great story to rattle me in the slightest. Then again, my journey isn't finished, is it now? That's all for now, folks. Thanks again for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this entry. I've dedicated a lot of my time to these stories in the last several days, and I am about to become busy. I have several more trips planned, and I have also been contemplating turning the accounts I have recorded into a book as of late. Having said that, I think my next post will be my last one. For now, at least. Or maybe left to be decided. I want to thank you all again. And, as always, see you all in the next story. Hello everyone. Sorry for making you guys wait. As this may well be my final entry, I contemplated very hard on how best to end this series. I wanted to share 3 of my more perplexing accounts, but because I've become very encumbered with several other projects, in addition to greenlighting, writing a novel on my accounts, I will unfortunately only be sharing 2. They may not be the most terrifying, but they sure kept me wondering for a while. I hope you enjoy them. I have an older relative whom, for as long as I can remember, and I'm sure you all possess at least one of, has always been unengaging at family functions. He is a quiet individual who never speaks to you unless you speak to him first. When you try to have a conversation with him, you can expect him to answer with few words. He is someone who doesn't care for sports. He doesn't care to drink. He doesn't swear. He doesn't have any hobbies or interests to talk about aside from fishing. But even when you do talk to him about his only vacation, the exchange is basic at best. Still, I don't think poorly of him, as some of my relatives do. In fact, I can say he is one of my favorite individuals in the family. We went fishing together once for an entire day, and less than 100 words were said between us. Best fishing trip of my life. That's why I was astonished the day he decided to share with me an incredible tale from his life. At this point, we had known each other for several decades. Yes, I'm old. And we'd established a comfortable familiarity of one another to the point he reciprocated my regarding sentiments of him. Instead of taking a random seat, he would join me on the occasion that I was of attendance. And it was at a certain gathering, where we hadn't seen each other in several years, that he decided to start a conversation with me. The event was a celebration of an addition to our family, It was a day of festivities, and in the late evening, when everything began to simmer, I got to sharing my stories, along with my journeys overseas, to the children and participating adults. The art of storytelling is a skill I am trying to polish, and I never reject an opportunity to practice. I had the lights dimmed to set the mood and began recounting my stories in bland expression. I found this was the method that produced the best results. I forgot how many stories I told, but one was of a wife whose husband left her and was left to care for their 6-year-old child on her own. The rundown of it is, a spirit or something unnatural invades their dwelling and takes the physical shape of the child. The mother is unaware that on occasions she is speaking to the thing instead of their child. It isn't until some time later that she realizes there is something fiendish happening in their house. I would provide how the story ends, but I think it'll be more fun if I leave you all in a state of wonder. I finished telling several more stories, to a point where everyone began to take their leave. As more and more people left, place empty to the point my reserved relative found it suitable to join me. He sat by me and spoke.
Is there truth to your stories?
He suddenly asked me. I peered over at him observantly, surprised, then inquisitive to his intentions. I don't know if they're true. I just collect them on my travels, I answered him. He didn't respond, and for a while, I thought our conversation was over.
Do you think they're true?
He then said to surprise me again. I think there's some truth to some of them, but that whatever truth there is has very likely been skewed by over-exaggerating details, I answered once I had recovered. Once again, he didn't give me any indication to signify our conversation was finished. I simply waited to see if he was going to continue, which he did. It's real, he flatly uttered. I glanced over at him, making sure I heard him correctly. What was that? I said to verify.
One of your stories happened to me,
he then said. The expression on his face conveyed he wanted to share a story. I wanted to urge him, but decided to let him go at his own pace. I was pleased of the choice I made.
when I was still a boy, when it was just my mom and me after my dad left. We lived in a small house with lots of room.
He began.
She was always at work, so I was always by myself. I would come home from school, cook myself something to eat, watch TV, then do my homework. Well, one day she calls home from work and starts yelling at me over the phone. She tells me that she had told me to do the laundry the day before when I stayed home from school because I wasn't feeling well. But when she came home that night, it hadn't been done. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about, but she just kept yelling at me. Then, one day, she yells at me for not getting the mail. Again, she says she had told me to go and get it when she saw me. This keeps going for a while, and at the time, I thought she was just going crazy because of our situation. Then one day, I'm in my room, and I hear her talking in the kitchen. I go see who she's talking to, and when I go in there, she's talking like there's someone there, but there isn't anyone. I ask her who she's talking to, and she says she's talking to me. I tell her I was in my room the entire time. When she tells me to stop joking, I kept telling her I wasn't there. Then she starts getting mad at me. I get mad too, because I don't know what she's talking about. By now, I'm just stunned that he's speaking so much. This was the most I've heard out of him at any point in my life, but the effects were doubled because of the topic he chose to speak to me about as our first actual conversation. For the next few months, we have this weird, angry relationship with each other, and we still both don't know the real reasons. Then, one morning, I wake up to her voice. She's in the kitchen again. She's in the kitchen again, talking to someone. I get up and quietly open my bedroom door to see who it is. I'm still angry with her, and I try to avoid her as much as possible. I'm still angry with her, and I try to avoid her as much as possible. I poke my head in the hallway, and I can see into the kitchen. I see someone sitting at the table eating cereal. I don't know who it is, so I keep looking. I watch my mom talk to this person. I think about going in the kitchen, but then the person sitting turns their head to the side, and I catch a glimpse of their face. It looks very familiar. I kept looking, and I realized that this person has the same hair as me, and the same skin color, and the same shirt, and the same pants, and the same everything. I'm still a boy at the time, but by now my heart is beating real fast. I just kept looking at the figure until it finishes eating cereal and gets up to leave. I panic and shut my door and jump back into my bed pretending I'm still asleep. I can hear the figure's footsteps, and it's coming towards the hallway. I'm beyond scared at this point, and wondering if this person that looks like me is going to come into my room. But it walks past and goes into another one. I hear the door close. I don't know what to do or what to think. I'm scared. I'm scared to get up. I'm scared to go into the hallway. I'm scared to go talk to my mom. So I just stay in bed all the way until dinner. When she comes into my room and tells me to come and eat, we eat, and I'm silent. I debate if I should tell her, and in the end, I don't. In fact, she doesn't know it ever happened because I never told her. I've never told anyone, not even my wife. You're actually the first person I told this to. When he finished, I sat, unknowing how to respond. My silent relative had just divulged an incredible story, one almost too incredible to believe. But how could I not? His entire demeanor, percolating, sincerity, mystified. I tried to study his expression, to get some bearings, but unfortunately, he displayed nothing I could discern. I don't know what that thing was. All I know is that it imitated me, and it made my mom think it was me. He expressed and said no more. Lost as to what to make of this, I decided to just ask him some questions. How many times did you see this thing? I asked. I want to say probably 12 times. He answered, always with your mom? No, one time I saw it in the kitchen by itself. It was just standing there, looking up at the cabinets. I saw it another time when I went into the basement to do laundry. There was a squatting in the corner, and I saw it one last time when I was watching TV in the living room, and I saw it in the hallway go from one bedroom to another. He replied. I shook my head. Weren't you scared? I asked him. At first, but then it didn't seem to be hostile, so he simply said and shrugged. I nodded, earnestly impressed and still puzzled. What do you think it was? I asked next. I don't know, maybe a ghost? I don't know, was all he said. When your mom remarried and you guys moved into your new father's house, did you see it there? No, I only ever saw it at our old house, he answered. I asked him several more questions, but the rest of the conversation became stale. It seemed after saying what he had to say, he had reverted back to his usual silent self, and I was unable to get much else from him. As a listener, perhaps his account wasn't particularly scary, but I will explain why it resided with me for such a long time, although I still don't know what to think of his story. I am familiar with the creature he described. It is known throughout many regions of the world, with North America being one of them. It is a creature I have very little details of, because not much is known about them, and it is difficult to obtain any information on it because, to my uncovering, it is of extreme taboo to talk about. Its mention has caused me to reject on more than 24 occasions and warranted caution. At each behest, you just do not talk about these creatures, as their superstitious belief is that any mention of them holds the hazard of attracting them. And while I remain a skeptic, I hold no proof, as of yet, that these things do not exist, which my relative's tale only served to reinforce this position. In the end, we never talked about it again, and he didn't seem to be bothered by it anymore, though I'll never know given his impossible to read demeanor. Perhaps one day, when the opportunity presents itself, I will have another talk with him, and hopefully I'll be able to pry more from him then. Moving on to the next story, I shall recount when I was granted my request of accompanying a 5-day hunting excursion in the jungle almost 10 years ago. I was on another trip to visit another remote village, and I had been elated when the village elder had approved my daring request. But I was a fool to think so. I regretted my decision within the first few hours of our journey. The bugs were relentless, and no amount of repellent would deter them. In the days following, I ran out of water. I was covered in ticks. I woke up every day with leeches on me. I developed blisters all over my feet. I was experiencing fatigue due to the lack of sleep. The bugs are very loud at night. I was always hungry. The hunters ate very little, and I ran out of snacks, and my entire body ached. I was so miserable that I couldn't even feel the satisfaction of carrying out one of the tasks I was so keen on setting out to do. I just wanted it to be over. I did my best to not be a hinder to my group and show that I was in misery, and I cursed at myself for believing I was prepared, though I would attempt this undertaking twice more in the future with much better readiness. When the final day in the jungle finally arrived,
We got up early to make back for the village. I couldn't remember ever being so happy in my entire life. I watched our group leader walk to the edge of our small camp and say some words before we departed. I don't know what was said, but I speculated he was conveying his gratitude to the forest, or that we were finished with our business. When we were done packing, we made on our way and took up a moderate pace to reach the village before nightfall. It must have been mid-afternoon when one of the members in the back called out something to the front. The group stopped, and I watched the men gather to convene. I looked on from outside the circle and detected concern. When they finished talking, one of the men who spoke limited English and acted as my interpreter came up to me. "Something followed us," he said to me. Stupidly, I looked at our trail. "No look," he rebuked me as soon as I did. I corrected myself and looked down. "We separated." He then motioned with his hands. "One go this way, one go that way." I was unsure what he meant, but it was made clear to me when our group split into two. "Look forward only," my interpreter then said to me as he took his position, and I did. I did not want to upset my group, nor the thing that he told me was following us. Still, I couldn't help but contemplate as we resumed marching. From the knowledge I possess, I gathered a forest spirit had happened on our group, or retracting it. I knew it not to be a predator, such as a tiger, because they have become extremely rare due to loss of habitat, illegal hunting, and their fear of humans. The way the men had acted also assured my deduction. We trekked on silently, and with no rest. The already difficult march had become even more strenuous now, as we had to do so with added tension, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one in our group to ponder the possibility of this thing following us, to act as I had been recounted on several occasions. But I trusted the men knew what they were doing, and it was our last day in the jungle, so there was relief in that regard. That is, until night began to descend upon us, and the men stopped to make camp. "We sleep one more night," my interpreter had answered me when I had inquired him. "I no say now." He shook his head at me when I asked why. I was stumped, but I resigned to follow their instructions and said no more until we got back to the village. The night was spent with the men taking turns on watch duty. I didn't sleep much myself, as, being present in the occasion and filled with tension, I could not help myself from recalling all of the stories about people disappearing in the forest at night, so I dozed in and out, each time counting our members whenever I woke up to make sure we were all there. I'm not sure if it was the shaman's blessings and the amulets we were given that protected us from harm or misfortune, but I was thankful none of us were missing when we awoke in the morning. We packed up hastily and once again resumed our trek back to the village. We returned safely that evening, and it wasn't until the following day that the other group emerged out of the forest. I was given some answers as to what had occurred. As I had correctly guessed, a forest spirit took curiosity to us. Whether it was malicious or not could not be said. The rear member, who was one of their more distinguished hunters, had spotted it and decided to speak up when he identified it had been stalking us for a while. To be safe, the leader decided to split the group into two to try and confuse it, while spending an extra day in the forest as a means to try and lose it. We don't know if we succeeded, but the village shaman decided to take precautions and performed a ritual at the edge of the village, probably to create a ward of sorts, to prevent the spirit from entering if we had failed to lose it on our return. The next day, I fell ill with fever. The shaman was brought in and performed a reading on me. It seems I had been the cause of the spirit stalking. When it encountered our group, it took curiosity to me because I smelled different or foreign. Supposedly, it visited our camp on the last night and got very close to me. It unbalanced my energies with its presence and resulted in my rendered condition. The shaman burned some herbs while chanting and prepared a medicine for me. I laid in bed for 3 days until I got better. I can say that this is probably the closest thing to a supernatural experience that I have ever encountered. I'll never truly know if there really had been something following us on that excursion. I don't recall hearing anything approach me, nor smelling anything unusual, or sensing any strange presence around me. I felt unnerved for sure, but that was the extent of it. As for my illness, I'm certain I can attribute it to my body's exposure to a foreign environment. It is a common occurrence for travelers and tourists as our bodies adjust to the local bacteria. I've fallen ill on more occasions than I can remember while abroad. Still, I won't rule out the event implausible. None of my rationales are definite, after all. But again, I'm not sharing these stories with the intent to make people believe in the supernatural. I am first and foremost, and always, a story collector. And that's what I intend to remain. Once again, thank you for listening. It has been fun sharing the stories I've collected, and I apologize to those of you who would like to see and read more of them. I don't mean to tease, but if I had more time, I would have liked to share more stories. I'm hoping this is not a goodbye, but a long farewell. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you again. And if you travel to Southeast Asia and trek in the jungles, please make sure you listen to your guides. This is actually my mom, late grandfather, and uncle's experience in the 70s, back when the houses in the metro were still blocks away from each other. If my memory serves me right, as told by my mama, she was 6 to 7 years old then, while my Tito, uncle, was a year younger than her. The story goes like this. One afternoon, my Lolo, grandfather, was asked to help in slaughtering the pig so they could use it for different dishes and be served to the guests by their neighbor, who will have a baptismal party the next day. My Lolo went there, and my mama and Tito, being the youngest that time, went with Lolo so they could play with their neighbor's children. It was already evening when they finished slaughtering and chopping the pig. Their neighbor gave Lolo the pig's head as a gratitude. On their way home, Mama noticed a big bird swirling around a tree. She was amazed on how big it was. Little did she know, Lolo was already aware and ready on their defense, having the bolo, large cutting tool of Filipino origin, similar to the machete, in his hand.
Lolo told Mama and my Tito to keep close to him and not to look up. Mama and Tito held Lolo tightly and hid their heads inside Lolo's t-shirt. Then Lolo raised his bolo together with the pig's head and said to that big bird, Ka dito kanai ikatan kitai lion mo kamai ni maga akana ko kon dostu mo sayo na iktong baboy. Translates to, get out from here or else I will strike you with this bolo. Get away from us. If you want, I'll just give you this pig. My mama, being a naughty kid, took a peek and saw the big bird flying away from them. When they reached home, Lolo told them that the big bird was actually what they call tick-tick, a creature who looks like a big bird. Most of its victims or prey are pregnant women. They love the smell of babies. Mama concluded that maybe the tick-tick went after them either because of the pig's blood or theirs. I personally don't know if I want. I personally don't know if I will believe in the story or not. I haven't seen any urban legend creatures yet. I am not sure if this is just my mama's way of scaring us when we were kids, so we will not stay up late outside. I've been reading some stories from the Philippines about the aswangs or ghouls, and I happen to have an experience with those night creatures. I was 15 that time, and my aunt, my mom's cousin, was 7 months pregnant. Was 7 months pregnant with her first child. My aunt lived with me and my maternal grandparents since her husband was working in another city. There were 2 rooms in my grandparents' house. I occupied one, and the other room was where my aunt slept, since my grandparents slept in a bed in the kitchen, since they said that it's cold there at night. The room I occupied was in front of the house, and the one my aunt occupied was near the garage. 100 meters from my grandparents' backyard is a forest. One night, I decided that I'll be sleeping with my aunt in her room. I just have a gut feeling that I need to sleep with her that particular night. My aunt and her husband believes in aswangs or ghouls who feed on unborn children. So my aunt always had garlic and salt, which they said that aswangs are scared of garlic and salt. She even had a machete beside her, a rosary from the Vatican, and a balisong butterfly knife under her pillow. After we watched some dramas, we decided to sleep then, since staying up late is not good for pregnant women. At around 2:30 a.m., I suddenly awake to a sound of I opened my eyes, and I felt chills all over my body. It's not dark in the room, since my aunt sleeps with the nightlight on. Then the ick sounds again, but it's not that loud, like it was from afar. Since I knew something about aswangs, Because of my aunt and her husband, I knew right then that when it sounds far, the truth is, it's really close. I switched on the light and tried waking up my aunt, but she just grunts. I was so scared at that time that I grabbed the machete. I smashed the garlic using the machete, so the smells of the garlic surrounded the room. Rubbed some garlic in the machete and some salt. Then the sound of ick ick was there again. I grabbed the rosary under the pillow of my aunt and put it on top of her belly. Then a loud gust of wind can be heard outside the window. The window in my aunt's room has metal railing bars that surround the windows, but one window pane was broken. There I saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring at me and then at my aunt. I was trembling in fear that time, but there's no room for fear that time, because I know that it's between being eaten alive or fighting. I chose to fight. I tightened my grip on the machete and pointed it at the monster outside the window. It looks like a big bird with huge wings. It hissed at me. I told the creature that I'm not fucking scared of her or him, and I am ready to fight. That time, my aunt was awake now and petrified at what she's seeing. The monster just hissed and started to flap its huge wings, but it's still on the window, staring at us. I began cursing again at the Oswald. I began throwing the smashed garlic and salts on it. It growls. It's a chilling growl that makes someone's knees tremble, but I hide my fear. It started to shout that I am really not afraid of them, and I'll kill them if it won't go away. I'm just bluffing that time. I know in myself that I am no match for that kind of creature. I started swaying the machete and cursing at the Oswald. My aunt was praying so hard behind me that suddenly a gunshot and someone cursing from outside. I grabbed that opportunity and throw the remaining garlic and salt at it. Then it growls again. And flapped its huge wings, hissed at me, and flew away. I told my aunt to stay at the center of the house with the rosary and balisong, and I grabbed some garlic from the kitchen and another batch of salts. This time my grandma was with my aunt now. I saw my grandpa with his hunting gun, and outside, I saw my uncle, who lives next door. I exit the house, still with the machete, and a big Caltech halogen flashlight. I told them what happened, and searched the surroundings. The monster was gone and never came back. Months later, my aunt gave birth to a healthy baby boy. I thank God for the metal bars in the window, because he never let something bad happen to us that night.
This story occurred in the year 2012 during one of my community outreach activities with my students called Immersion. The students have to stay for 3 days and 2 nights in one community or village with the host families assigned by the teacher and field coordinators. Host families were chosen by the barangay or village officials. I was the teacher. I had my own host family along with my assistant. In one of my immersions, we were assigned in a remote municipality known for NPAs, or New People's Army, considered as rebels, or government enemies. There were many stories already by the folks, and while we were preparing for a feeding activity in the multi-purpose hall, my students talked about the massacre years ago in the very same ground we're in. The massacre stories were told by their host families, but even though there are still NPAs out there, I assured them we are safe. There was a military camp on top of the hill. On the first night, I was patrolling with my assistant and 2 barangay officials, ensuring that all of the students are already at home. Their curfew was 10 p.m. So we were at the far end of the village when I saw a group of my students sitting on the wood under the tree, and it seems they were debating on something. While looking at the camera, Mel, one of my students, was holding. I approached them and asked why they are still outside. But instead of answering my question, they all stared at me in horror. One female student spoke. "Ma'am, look at this," she said, handing me the digital camera. I saw Mel's stolen shot. He's covering his face like he's being teased. But over his face was a face in the form of a shadow. A round face, big eyes, and a big flat nose. The lips were not visible, but it's like it's hitting a cigarette. My assistant, Toots, and the 2 officers also looked at the photo. It looks like a tree giant, or in Filipino language, Capri. Puzzled, I asked my student, "Did you edit this?" They all shook their heads. "No, ma'am. That was taken a few seconds before you arrived." Then, the officer said that the tree near them is really haunted, so they better go inside the house. I went to their respective houses, and we headed back to my host family's place. While walking, Toots told me that he feels someone is with us. Because of the goosebumps around his body, he suddenly felt cold and asked me to walk faster. I did as told, though I didn't feel anything different. When we entered the house, it stayed outside. We both had little sleep that night. I spent most of the time praying and holding the rosary. The story is about my grandmother. This happened several years ago, before I was born. I heard about this story while my mom and her sisters were bonding together, reminiscing about their childhood, particularly about my grandma. She is the same grandma in my previous story, Displaced Entities. When my grandma was young, she was not as religious as she used to be before she died in 2002. They lived in a house near the National Railroad. My grandparents were not rich, but my grandfather was a well-known artist or painter in our hometown, and people usually asked him for a lot of artwork. My grandfather, however, was too kind-hearted to charge people with his work, especially when it was commissioned by his friends. So when he died, he left little money for his family. However, it was my grandfather's kind-heartedness that saved his family. All of his friends shouldered his funeral expenses, and some of them pledged to pay for my auntie's education expenses. Now my grandmother, on the other hand, was loved by my grandfather very much. They got married at the age of 14 and 16 to save my grandmother from being taken by the Japanese Imperial Army during the Japanese occupation in the Philippines. She was spoiled and treated too indulgently, so when he died, my grandma became depressed. She started playing Mahjong, a Chinese tile-based game, with her friends, and will stay up until the wee hours in the morning. According to my mother, as the eldest among 7 children, she took the responsibility of looking after her siblings. She would stay up late, waiting for Grandma. My grandmother's gambling habit went from bad to worse until one scary evening when she had the most frightful experience. When she was on her way home at 3 a.m. from a friend's house, my grandmother saw a huge black dog a few feet away from her. The dog was so huge. It was like 5 feet tall, and it was just standing in the middle of the road, staring at her. My grandmother was startled, as it was so unusual to see a dog that big. What scared her was how the dog was acting so strange. It was doing nothing, and just staring at her. She could also hear a growl, like as if the dog was going to pounce at her. She started to walk fast, and her heart almost dropped when she had to walk past the dog, which was still staring at her. She kept on walking and was too scared to look back. When she turned on the next corner, she continued walking until she saw something weird from a distance. There was this huge gray bird perched on the edge of a banana tree a few feet away. My grandmother stared intently at the large, powerfully built bird as she continued to walk forward. Its eyes were bright red, and it was also staring back at her. The hair at the back of her neck started to raise when she realized that the bird was perched at the edge of a banana stalk, which was physically impossible. My grandmother realized that what she was looking at was not an ordinary bird, but an osway or a shapeshifter. The bird was too heavy for the banana stalk to sustain its weight, but it just stood there without the stalk breaking. The bird made a sudden scary screech sound and made my grandmother jump and run. When she was a few feet away from the banana tree, she heard a sudden flapping of heavy wings from behind, and she knew right then that the bird was flying towards her. My grandmother went in an instant swoop down to avoid the bird as it flew over her head. Its talons grazing her hair. According to my mom, flying osweys normally grabbed their victims on their legs. Then they lift them up in the air and throw them to the ground to incapacitate their victims. That is then the time they devour their victims once they have been disabled. My grandmother started shouting for help as she ran as fast as she could.
She knew that there was no way she could outrun the Oswine, so she went inside a huge cement pipe at the side of the street, as there was a government construction project being done in that area. My grandmother hid there, crying and praying for her life. She could still hear the flapping of wings outside, circling the area. Fortunately for her, the neighbors heard her cry for help. Houses started to switch the lights on, and a few people went out to check what was going on outside. The Oswine left, and my grandmother crawled out of the cement pipe. From that day on, my grandma stopped gambling and has never stayed up late outside again. She became a devout Christian until the day she left us.